If you started this month with really good intentions about things that you wanted to get done, stuff you wanted to accomplish, but now we're at the middle of the month point and you're feeling like the motivation has dipped, you've not made as much progress as you wanted to, and possibly you'll just catch it again next month, then this type of layout could be really helpful for you. This is what I call my mid-month check-in or mid-cycle check-in, depending on how you like to break down your calendar. And effectively, it's just a little way to take stock of what I have done this month so far, what I haven't done or things I might have been neglecting, and recommit, reprioritize, and remotivate myself to get things done. In terms of the setup of the layout, you can see we have several different sections that we're going to fill in together. So grab a pen, grab your notebook, and we're going to go through step by step. Obviously, I'm going in here and putting in all of my sections ahead of time, mainly because I know what sections I need to include or the ones that I like to use. And it means that we can focus more so on how you would use the sections and what kind of things you might want to write down in them. If you're doing this for the first time though, it can really just pay to work through the sections one by one. So start in the top left of your page, work your way down to the bottom, then go back up to the new column once that one's full, so on and so forth. Especially if you don't necessarily know how much you're going to be writing in each of the sections. Previously, I actually used to be able to fit all of this on one page, but I've expanded it a little bit since then, so now it's on a full spread. All this to say, you don't have to start with it pre-sectioned out, but the first section we're going to fill in is the goals section. One of the issues that people sometimes run into with their goals is forgetting what they committed to working on. Yes, they're kind of kicking around in the back of our mind as like stuff we want to work on at some point, but which ones did you specifically set out to work on this month? Those are the things we're going to fill in this section here. If you'd written your goals out for yourself in a monthly intention space or dashboard layout, then it can pay to flip back and see what you'd written down for yourself. I've recently reviewed mine, so I can do mine from memory. And at this stage, we're not trying to go in with any kind of critical mindset of like, oh look, you said you were going to do all these things and none of them have been done. That's not a productive line of thinking, so we're not going to go with that. It's more so just putting it here so that we can remind ourselves the things that we did want to work on, so we consider what has been done or hasn't been done with regards to them. In terms of the goals that I'm writing down, I have 6 separate ones, and I can safely say that maybe only 2 or 3 of them have actually been worked on. Like I mentioned, one of the biggest challenges when it comes to goal work is forgetting our goals, not necessarily forgetting what we wanted to work on, but more so just forgetting to carve out time for them. Other things in life pop up, we get busy, we need to prioritize other things, so these goals can sometimes take a little bit of a backseat, which is why I like to put them down first on this page. Oftentimes though, when it comes to working on goals, they're not necessarily the only things that get worked on that feel like accomplishments. Oftentimes, I like to separate those things out into projects that I'm working on. These are things that came up throughout the course of the month or the course of the quarter, depending on when I'm looking, that weren't specifically the things I outlined at the start of the month or quarter that I wanted to work on, but when they popped up, I committed to spending time on those as well. When it comes to the difference between a goal and a project, for me, a project has a very specific set outcome that I'm hoping for, and that outcome is something that's within my control. A goal, on the other hand, is typically a bit bigger, can be a little bit fuzzier, and can also just be a project that I put on a pedestal. Really though, for a lot of my goals, we could consider the terminology of goals and projects interchangeably, but when it comes to writing down our 2 separate lists, here we're really thinking about what did I intentionally set out to work on this month? Those are the goals. And what other things came up this month that have multiple steps that need to get done in order for them to be accomplished? Those would be the projects. You can certainly combine them into the same list if you want to. I just like to keep them separate so that I can see the things I intentionally set out to work on versus the things that I kind of just picked up along the way. Essentially though, with my goals and projects lists, these are the things that I wanted to take up my time with this month, outside of just the regular busyness of life. I again like to have these first on the page, just so that then when I'm filling in the rest of the sections, I can come back and reflect on these things. So what have I accomplished with regards to this goal, this goal, this goal? What kind of things are in progress for these projects? The next section I like to fill in though are the accomplishments, because we can often get into this mindset of, oh, I haven't done this, I haven't done that. I like to combat that by starting with the positive. When it comes to figuring out what you have accomplished though, you can flip back to any monthly setups you had, so anything that outlined what you wanted to work on for these things, so action steps, tasks, stuff like this. It could be in your monthly setup, or it could be in your daily logs. So going back and having a look at the things that you wrote down, what got checked off, were any of those those relevant to the goals and projects you are working on. You can of course also include accomplishments in here that aren't specifically related to your goals and projects. As we've touched on, oftentimes we do forget about what our intentions were for any period of time, unless we're, specifically coming back to them and reviewing them over and over. But that's not to say that we've wasted all of this time. We haven't taken the first half of the month and just done literally nothing with it. So even if your accomplishments aren't specifically related to your goals and projects, still write them down. I oftentimes like to start these ones with a little check mark because it just feels very satisfying. And one of my major accomplishments is not related to either of these, and I'm going to write that down first. I really encourage you to take some time to think about what you have accomplished, whether that be in general or with relation to your goals and projects, mainly because so often we can get to the end of a day or a week or a month and be like, what did I even do? We do definitely have a tendency to forget having done a task as soon as it's completed. Once it's checked off, it's out of our mind. We don't need it taking up brain space anymore because we have other stuff we have to get done. This accomplishments list really just gives us that opportunity to say, actually, I have done things, I have made progress that I can be proud of. One of the reasons that I love bullet journaling and planning in general is that I have a record of achievement. I have the lists of things that I set out to do for each day and I've crossed off the ones that got done. Oftentimes these aren't necessarily everything that I did, but typically speaking, anything that felt like an accomplishment in the moment, even if it wasn't initially on my daily log list, I'd probably write it down and check it off just so I felt that satisfaction when I did do it. Going back through these entries and seeing the stuff that I checked off just acts as a little reminder that yes, I have done things and I can continue to do things. I also find that by making myself focus on the things I've accomplished, I get the opportunity to recognize that I've actually made more progress than I think I have. Now, this isn't necessarily always the case, but by starting with this, it puts me in a much better mindset for the rest of the reflection. Like, sure, there are things that haven't been done, but there are things that have been done, and I can be pleased with that progress that I've made. While the accomplished section is more for the things that have been done, like they're finished, the in progress section is for the things that I've started, but I'm not quite done with. I like to give myself credit for even partial progress, so for stuff that I have started, haven't quite finished off yet, and this also typically makes the basis for my priorities list for the rest of the month. I want to wrap up the things that I've started because I've already started making progress on them, so there's less to do than some of the things maybe I've been neglecting, but that'll be the next section we tackle. The in progress section is another one that I like to flip back through my daily logs and see what things have half crosses, what kind of multi-step processes have had some of the steps completed. These may also be related to the accomplishments because sometimes the accomplishment is like a part of a process rather than the full process. What I do try to avoid here though is just rewriting what my goals are, because technically speaking all of these are in progress, they've had something done for them. I'm also thinking about smaller actions that I can take or smaller parts of each of those goals that have had something done towards them but aren't quite finished with. For these bullets I like to use a regular dot because I can come back to this layout and cross them off when I have done them. Filling in this section is going to highlight one of the reasons that I think it's better, at least when you're just getting started, to work through section by section, putting in the header for the next section only once you've filled in the one that came before it. I don't have quite enough things that are in progress right now to fully fill in this box. Not that that's really a problem, I just personally like it when my journal layouts are nice and full. But of course, if and or when other things come to mind, things that are in progress, I can add them into the bottom of the box with the space that I have left over. As mentioned before, the neglected list is for things that I have not started. They're things or actions, steps that I wanted to take with regards to goals and projects that I had intended to do this month, but thus far I have not started with them. That's not to say that I won't do any of them, we still have half a month left, but I find that collating them all into one designated spot can be helpful for being able to figure out which ones are still reasonable to do and which ones I might need to let go of. Let me know if you can relate, but I often have a bad estimation of how much I can get done in any span of time, whether that be over or underestimating it. And while I start a month saying like, oh, I've got a full month to get this stuff done, of course it's gonna happen, I will often forget or neglect that like life happens, other things are gonna come up, and I also have all of my regular everyday going-ons that I have to account for as well. That aside though, filling in the neglected section is not an opportunity to beat ourselves up. That is not gonna be a helpful mindset, it is not gonna help us get more things done. It's just going to end up making us feel crummy about ourselves, and I don't want you to feel crummy about yourself. but more so by bringing all of those items into one list, we can more critically analyze whether or not they're going to be accomplishable, or at least in the rest of the month that we have. It might be that some of these are just not really tasks, they're more like mini projects in themselves, and they need to be broken down more and made easier or more actionable. When I'm writing this list down, I'm not so much trying to change the tasks at all, but more so bring the initial intentions I had for how I was going to work on my goals and projects, and write them down kind of as they were stated originally in my journal. Or if they weren't stated in my journal, write them down as I probably would have written them down in my journal. We're not trying to fix any problems with wording here, we're just trying to collate these ideas together. This is another list that I'll use a regular task bullet, mainly because if I do get to complete them this month, I can flip back to this layout and cross them off. Or if I move them into the priorities list, I can put a little migrated arrow on them. One of the things to also be wary of is making a neglected list that is way longer than any of the other lists we've got so far. If you're finding that the list of things you've neglected is a lot longer than the things you've accomplished, it could be that you have a case of putting a little bit too much on your plate, or maybe too many expectations on yourself to get things done with the time you have. Sure, there are of course instances where the first half of the month was really busy, so even though you have a laundry list of stuff that still needs to get done, maybe the second half of the month is gonna slow down, maybe you have a bit more time. But just taking the physical size of each of the lists you've written so far, I'm usually a little critical of my neglected list, and if it is way longer than the accomplished and the in progress combined, then I take the opportunity to reflect on that and consider maybe I need to cut that list back a little, prune it a little, so that I'm just focusing on the things that really matter in the second half of the month. The next section I like to fill in though are the challenges. Oftentimes I put this after the neglected list because there's a reason these things haven't gotten done. Similar to the neglected list, this is not an opportunity to dwell on the negative and be all woe is me. Yes, your feelings are valid and maybe you have had a really hard start to the month, it definitely happens. But this spot is more so to honor the fact that challenges have happened, not dwell on them and use them as an excuse to not get things done. What I often find from listing out my challenges though, is it gives me an opportunity to consider how I approached them. What kind of responses did I have to the challenges, and did those take me in a productive, more helpful direction, or did they actively work against the things I wanted to get done? While I don't necessarily unpack that in this check-in, it is something that you can add in, so an additional box after the challenges to consider what your responses were and consider whether they were helpful for moving you forward. Of course, there are also going to be challenges that we'll face that are outside of our control, and we want to note those down too, but as said, we don't necessarily want to dwell on them, we're just honoring the fact that they've happened and giving them space on this page. It's also good to note that because this reflective process is more so for my goals, my projects, getting things done, when I'm thinking about the challenges, I'm more so specifically thinking about the ones that would have impacted my productivity or impacted my work on my goals and projects. There are going to be challenges that we face that aren't really all that related. For instance, if all of my goals and projects were related to my home or my household, then missing a deadline at work isn't necessarily a challenge that really impacts that. Yes, it could have caused stress, and that stress could have flowed over into my home and household area, but I more so like to focus on the ones that are going to have a more immediate impact. From here though, you can further explore the challenges, consider what helped or what hindered in terms of working on your goals and projects. But the next section I'm going to fill in is oddly not this one, it's this one, which is called my tactic review. Now the reason I put it down here is literally just because I wanted a full column for the mind unwind section, which is going to be the next spot we fill in. But the tactic review is considering any kind of strategies or tactics that I came into the month with, the ones that I thought were going to help me in terms of working on goals and projects, and just reflect on how well they are working, or whether I've been utilizing them well. Now, unless you've gone into the month very specifically outlining, saying like, oh, I'm going to select like one major task I'm doing for the day, and I'm going to close my door when I'm working and stuff. These are specific examples for my situation right now, because those are the tactics that I selected. If you didn't come into the month considering those things and specifically highlighting those as stuff that you wanted to try, then this section might not be the most useful for you, but it is something you can consider for next month. Are there any strategies or tactics that you want to try with relation to getting things done? Ones that you can specifically single out as I'm going to try and implement that this month and see how it works for my process. If we flip back, the ones that I ended up selecting were shutting the door while I'm working, setting a visible timer, doing regular mind unwinds, and doing my life admin roleplay game. So for each of these, I'm going to write them down here and just consider how much are they paying off. Some of the questions that you can ask yourself with relation to this section is, have I actually been using the tactic, or how often or how consistently have I been using it? When I use it, has it been helpful? Is there any way to make it more helpful, or is there any way to make it more likely that I use it if it is helpful? And if it's not helpful, can I tweak it or change it or maybe adjust my approach so that it could work better for me? If you're just finding that it is something that just doesn't work for you, it's not a tactic or a strategy that you really want to implement, you could also then brainstorm any other options that you might have to fill that niche. For instance, one of the tactics that I've been trying to use is shutting my door while I'm working. It effectively just signals to anybody else who's in the house that I am busy and I shouldn't be interrupted. Of course, that's literally just my partner Vogel because I work at home, but because it's summertime at the moment where I'm based, it means that closing my door makes my office really hot. It's not necessarily something that I want to do on a daily basis because I don't want my office to be uncomfortable to be in because of the temperature, so possibly there's something else that I could do that would give the same effect, but it wouldn't have that problem. For instance, maybe I can put on visible headphones, so it kind of also signals, hey, she's working on something right now, don't interrupt her. That way I could still have my door open and not have to live in the hot box that would become my office. As said, this section isn't necessarily going to be helpful for everyone. You do kind of have to have come into the month with some intentions around what kind of tactics you might be trying to use, but you could also use this as a section to review your challenges and the responses you've had to them and consider whether those were helpful. Once you reviewed your tactics or responses to challenges, the next section that I like to fill in is a mind unwind. This is essentially just another term for a brain dump, for getting all of my thoughts out of my head and onto the page. The reason that I like to do this as part of the check-in process, especially considering the check-in process is typically about goals and projects kind of a thing, is because by having all of my thoughts out on paper, along with the things that are in progress and the things that I've neglected, I can then consider all three of those lists before I make my priorities. This priorities list is effectively like a focused task list for the rest of the month, stuff that I want to get done, but I don't want to neglect everything else that's going on in life just in favor of working on goals and projects. Not that I'd even be able to, because life be lifin' and I'm gonna have to do some stuff related to it. That being said, the mind unwind section can certainly have things related to goals and projects in there as well. It's just that I don't limit myself to this. One of the things that I like to do when doing a mind unwind or brain dump is time restricting myself so that I don't spend all of my time just trying to get all of my thoughts out of my head. To actually get all of your thoughts out of your head, it can take quite a while, so I typically like to put on a little timer for either 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes, depends on how full I think my head is. But by time restricting it, it means that I'm more focused on the task at hand, which means that I then still have time to do the other two sections on the layout. As we're going through this, you might be thinking, oh my gosh, this takes so much time, like why would you do this at the halfway point every single month? And if this is a new process to you, yeah, it probably does take time, but you're allowed to be a learner, you're allowed to take some time to get used to the process, and the more you do it and get comfortable with it, the less time it ends up taking. That being said though, it does still take time. Me doing this each month does take some time out of my day, but I find that it's time well spent. Because I like to be very intentional and reflective about this process, and I'm really using it to kind of push myself forward and get more stuff done, even though it can take me like 20-ish minutes to do, it's time that I feel is well spent. It's kind of similar to like starting your day with 10 minutes to write out a checklist for yourself of stuff you want to accomplish. It means that you end up tackling your day with more focus and more intention, thus making better use of your time and being able to get more things done. Sure, we could have spent that 10 minutes working on the stuff that we would have put on the task list, but spending that time to pre-plan, structure things out, sequence them so we know what order we're going to do things in, it just ends up having more payoff than it would have been using that time to just get to work. In this case, the timer that I set for myself was 5 minutes. You can only see the top of the timer here, but once the timer ran out, then it was time to move on to the next section. This would be the priorities list, so thinking about the stuff that I have in the mind unwind, the in progress space and neglected, and also anything else that comes to mind, but what are the things that in particular I want to put my focus towards, I really want to make sure that they get done before the new month is here. Now you might be wondering, what then is the difference between priorities and before next month? I kind of think about this in terms of something like an Eisenhower matrix. Just bringing in some scrap paper here, if you haven't heard of the Eisenhower matrix, it's effectively a system for figuring out what you should be doing. So we have two axes. one for importance and one for urgency. If something is highly important and highly urgent, then that is a priority, but similarly, something might not be all that urgent and still important, and that could also be a priority for me. Just because something doesn't have a specific, hard-pressed deadline that I need to work to, doesn't mean it isn't something important. Ideally though, I'll fill up the majority of my priorities list with these things. For stuff that isn't overly important, but is kind of urgent, this is the space that I would be putting the tasks for my before the next month list. Or essentially anything on my list that I don't deem as overly important, but it is kind of urgent, it does need to be done before the end of the month. The tasks that fit into that descriptor are the ones that I put in this before next month list. Anything that is not all that important and not all that urgent is stuff that I'll probably do at some stage, but it might end up being a future me problem. Putting that away though, so that we can start writing out the priorities. As can be expected, I'm just going through the 3 lists that I already have and considering what things are the most important and the most urgent, or just important enough that the urgency doesn't really matter, and I'm adding those to my priority list section. This is another one that I just use a regular task bullet so that as they get done I can cross them off, and this is also where I start to think about rewording any of the things that are in the neglected space, mainly so that they are more clear, more actionable, easier. I really want to turn them into tasks that do get done. Now as I've pulled out the more important and urgent things, anything else that's left over that I want to do as well, but it's just not quite as important, that can go in this list here. This one's more so thinking about urgency rather than importance, so is there anything that's not quite as important but still needs to be done before the end of this month? This could also be things that you'd just like to get done before the end of the month. They're not overly important, but it would feel like an accomplishment to have them finished. And just because I put them on this list doesn't mean that they will happen before the new month, but I am going to be making a more conscious effort to get them done. What you can do after writing out your priorities and your before next month lists is considering when you're going to do those things. So which ones are going to happen next week or the week after? Are there particular days of the week or times within the week that you could assign to getting these things done? I'm not going to be doing those here, but once I come to set up for the next week, I'm going to be pulling some items off each of these lists and assigning them to my priorities for that week in particular. I'm much more likely to see those items if they're on my weekly task list, so by moving them over to there, I'm more likely to see them, thus more likely to remember them, and thus more likely to get them done. This is the process that I take every month to just re-motivate me, kind of realign my priorities, so that I can make the most of the rest of the month. You still have time to get things done. And sure, maybe your neglected list is looking a little long, maybe the stuff that you started but you haven't finished is a little bit overwhelming. Just pull out the stuff that's going to be the most important, the ones that are going to be the most impactful, and focus on those for the rest of the month. This is definitely an integral part when it comes to my goal setting and goal getting processes, so if you wanted to see more videos on how you can use your journal to get your goals accomplished, then this playlist is the next one to check out. That one has all of our other goal related content, so click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.